independent professional directors, put them all in the same pot, guess who's not going to come up to the top? Yep, that's right, councillors. Because I ain't a professional director of anything. I don't have that CV. So how are you going to await?
Thank you very much, Councillor Casey.
No, I haven't finished. I just stopped because you were busy.
No, that's okay.
Right. So my question is, how are you going to upskill me to become the professional director that David's kind of all those things that I need to now be able to tick to be even considered in the pot? It's absolutely ludicrous, actually. Because none of us, as I said when I was not meant to be speaking, none of us, when people elect us, it's because they want to be represented by us. They wouldn't know my skill set. They wouldn't know my qualifications. They wouldn't know any of that list that David read out. And so you're denying the people of Auckland my representation on the Board of Auckland Transport because I will never fit the skill set for the independent professional directors, unless you want to give me a few years of professional development. So there's two things then. The political discussion I want to know from my colleagues if you believe we should have councillor representation on the Board of Auckland Transport, not up against other. See, this is all conflated. So that's number one: is should we have councillor directors? Should we have councillors on the board? Yes. Yes, we should. So that's my number one. And number two is. I think there are exceptional circumstances. I didn't even know there was an out clause. So why did you take them off if there was a clause that we could have used to keep them on for a little bit longer? And I would suggest a little bit longer is the next 3 years. And if, Councillor Fletcher said she might like to step down, well then, who else wants to do it? Mike wants to go back on. We don't treat people like this. These are good people. They tick all the boxes. They fit that description of exceptional circumstances. And I'll stop now. Because I don't know, this isn't the way to do this debate. So I'm going to vote against everything you've got up there. But I'm tempted to move an amendment, which is to recommend to the Appointments and Review Committee that Mike Lee and one other councillor be appointed to the AT board. So that's not conflated with the other directors, it's just that they be appointed. That's the way we do business around here. If there's a seconder to that, I'll certainly put it up. John, thank you.
Okay. We now have Councillor Simpson. Sorry, we are just about at the point where we have been going for 6 hours. Just flashed by me like that. But I am required to move under standing orders as an extension of time to allow that there be an extension of time to allow business to be completed. This is the last substantive item on the agenda. We've got another 3 speakers. We could probably finish quite quickly. I'll move it. Seconded by...
sorry, you do that one first.
Okay, so I've moved it. You're seconding it?
I'm happy to.
Yep. Okay. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, carried.
Point of order, Mr Mayor?
Yep. Councillor Darby.
The motion that's been moved and seconded, can I have a ruling on whether that is consistent with the governance manual, which is in effect?
I'd have to seek an opinion on that. Independent opinion would be better than my own opinion.
If
the chair.
If it was passed, that is.
Yeah.
If this was passed, this will fulfil the policy. This is the process that you're deciding on today, and the policy just said that in the new triennium, the council would decide the process. Today is the process.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at the governance manual.
I mean, obviously, if that's the official advice, yes, but I would have thought that if we didn't go through the policy of interviewing and checking against the school matrix, we would be in contradiction of the policy.
Of course. I thought that Councillor Darby was asking, was today's meeting follow the policy?
No.
He's talking about
I'm referring...
the amendment.
Sorry, I think Mr Mayor...
You're referring... Sorry, we're referring to the amendment that I haven't yet got in my hand, but Kathy's working on.
No,
it's up there?
It's up there.
Okay. It's coming. Apparently it's not up there, it's coming. And that amendment was to cut across the normal process of appointment and to move that, that Councillor Lee, Mike Lee, be appointed for a further term. My advice at this end of the table is that that's not consistent with the policy and would be in contradiction of it.
It was using the exceptional circumstances clause, which you have seemingly ignored. I didn't realise there was such a clause until today.
Yeah, but that would
So-
still cut across the process by which we would, there is a chance to argue before the Appointments and Review Committee that there are exceptional circumstances, but that is the place where it should happen.
That's why I'm suggesting in my amendment that's where it happens.
Well, I think the way to do that, Councillor, is for, if Councillor Mike Lee wanted to put his name forward, certainly to do that. There is nothing that prohibits him from doing that, and that committee, or the Appointments Committee rather, would determine whether they were exceptional circumstances. But I don't think we should do it in the midst of the governing body without having an independent appointments committee actually working through that process. I think we would contradict our own rules if we were to do that. Councillor Lee, you were...
Mr Mayor, I think the situation has been muddled up sufficiently already. In the circumstances, it's embarrassing and difficult when one's own name is bandied around, and I really appreciate Councillor Casey for putting forward that amendment and it being seconded, but I'd prefer that my name be withdrawn at this stage, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. That clarifies that matter. Can we, having had an extension of time moved, let's try to use our time effectively. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I think that most of Auckland really wants to see this council put the control into the CCOs. And at the moment, I think they don't believe that there is any. I think that the report that we have in front of us, the key point is on page 8, item 24, and that is the other tools that we have to make our CCOs, or to strengthen their accountability, transparency and deliverables, especially with AT, and what is such a huge percentage of ratepayers' money. I think the accountability policy is vital. So we clearly set out our expectation first and foremost, and that's using Section 90 of the Local Government Auckland Council Act. I think that to modify their statement of intent by resolution, so it acts in according to how we want them to act, i.e. with our strategic direction, and not let them go off on a tangent of their own, as has often been perceived as the case. And then, of course, the third one is to be able to control the rules in which they operate, including the rules of governance. So I believe those three tools will really, really vitally change what's currently the perception and, more importantly, the deliverable of what's happening now. As for councillors being appointed onto the board of AT, I want to really test out the amount of time that Auckland Transport actually, and the meeting times and how that conflicts with the governing bodies and other committee structures, because first and foremost, councillors around this table have been elected to do the job of councillor or governing body member for Auckland Council. And what I saw unwittingly is that the time that was pushed by Auckland Transport to get those councillors to attend their meetings often conflicted those councillors, so that they were pushed to sort of try and be in two places at once. They never succeeded, and actually they ended up by probably not doing either very well from a time perspective.
Not right.
Well, from a time perspective, because, you know, you never believe everything you read in the Herald, but I did see a list of, you know, of councillors and their times, you know, and who, you know, turned up the most and whatever. And the two Auckland Transport ones were at the bottom, and I, you know, believe that potentially that was because they were doing Auckland Transport work as opposed to being able to do this. So I think that's a really relevant case, and when we're looking at the job description, for want of a better word, we need to bear in mind that a councillor has the time to spend at the Auckland Transport Board meeting without hindering or compromising their work as a governing body member.
It is our work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson. Councillor
a
Wayne
secondary
Walker.
Sure. I'd just like to state first that entirely in support of having councillors on the board, and I'll just go through somewhat of a list in how I arrive at that. As far as I'm concerned, we around here have got accountability, we've got authority, we've got responsibility. And that authority goes not just to us as in our governing function, but obviously oversight over CCOs and functions, but particularly functions that go to transport. If there's one issue, and one issue that is probably more important than anything else for people in Auckland, it's around transport. If there's one issue where they want accountability, where they want stuff done, where they want responsibility, where they want authority, it's that issue. And we're not grappling with it. We are not grappling with it, and we know that we need to take much more radical steps than what we should be doing, than what we are doing, especially around public transport and around other things. And frankly, my view is that Auckland Transport is not going to deliver as radically on those issues as what council might deliver, as what a drive from councillors on that board might help to deliver. The context, and that's another test that I've seen here, is we've dismantled our oversight over transport. We've eliminated our infrastructure committee now, we've eliminated the transport committee that we had, so our oversight and our contestable advice has actually been reduced. So we are more than ever dependent on the advice that we're getting from Auckland Transport and from the board members, who we don't see particularly often. So we need to take control back. In terms of the test around public expectation, the feedback that I got from people across my ward is they wanted us to take control back.
Well, these tools will help us do it.
As far as the role is concerned, I don't see it as a substitutive role. I'd suggest it's entirely complementary. If Mike's on the Auckland Transport Board, or Christine, or someone else, as far as I'm concerned, that is a complementary role, and we should be pursuing the principle of delegation. That is, it's a very effective place for them to be if we're working as part of a team. That's my view. And I don't think that thus far this council has worked effectively as part of a team, and part of that teamwork goes to our oversight over our CCOs. And there ain't teamwork there. Many of them are pulling in entirely, well, not different directions, but they're doing things that we don't have sufficient oversight over. I'm really concerned that I think this issue has been dealt with in some haste, and I'd like to take more time over it. If it meant keeping Mike and Christine on for a while longer, then so much the better. If we did have a concept and principle that it was useful to have councillors on the board, then let's, as has been suggested, bring some councillors on. Let's do that. Let's regard that as part of our role. Frankly, my own personal view with some of the CCOs is we'd be better off bringing them back into the fold, possibly under a different structure than a CCO, but something else, so that we've got more control and we can act more for the people of Auckland. So that's my view. There are a number of points where I think there's significant merit having councillors on the board, and I think the legislation reflects that allows this, and the circumstances are exceptional.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the question session, the officers referred to a policy called the Appointment and Remuneration Policy, and that outlined the core competencies. They just got read out to us, which I think a lot of people in this room would actually hold. They weren't overly rigorous, in my opinion. But I've got a copy of that, and it reads a bit further. It also says board members of substantive CEOs are also expected to have experience in governance, and preferably in corporate governance and an understanding of the public service ethos. However, the council may waiver the corporate governance requirement in order to attract a wider range of board members and to further its diversity policy of these skills and experience policy of these skills and experience are already well represented of the board. And Kathy, it goes on to say, boards are expected to provide director training for directors with limited corporate governance experience. So just paraphrasing that, if you haven't got those skills of having been in corporate governance, then you can be appointed to that board and you can be given the training. So I mention that too because, Mr. Mayor, it might be helpful in terms of the skill sets that we look for in that board in terms of sector representation. And I'm thinking of people like probably the AA, Employers and Manufacturers Association, Public Transport and Cycling, lobbyists and other sector membership. So I hope that just bringing this to the debate is helpful to you, sir. And I mention it mainly to avoid creating an accidental inherent risk that commercial imperatives could override the public's right to know what's happening with their assets and way those are being managed. So just to summarise, the point I'm trying to make here is that there is latitude for us not to stick to a total corporate made-up group of individuals. There is ability to bring in much more diversity and a wider skill set that might be very helpful, Mr. Mayor, in getting wise decisions made by that CCO.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sayers. We've had 6 speakers now. I've got one more listed, and then I think we're probably pretty ready to close off. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I'll take it.
Yeah. As me?
Councillor Lee. Yeah, no, you first, Councillor Newman.
I mean, Your Worship, the Companies Act requires, it confers duties on directors, which are quite specific. And the Companies Act also applies liability to directors, which are quite specific. So there is a requirement of a director of a company, whether it be a company or a subsidiary of a wholly owned subsidiary of a parent company, to act in accordance with the best interests of that company. And that's what any member of the Board of Auckland Transport is required to do. So I think that that's precisely what our councillors have been trying to do, and the liabilities that they face as directors are precisely the reason why they have to be remunerated, because they have responsibilities and they have liabilities. Your Worship, I'm trying to be supportive and constructive here. So I can accept the recommendation that you have set out, that there will be a report which provides an opportunity for strategic alignment. But I go back to the point that I was trying to get to in the question that I asked the officers previously around the role of the Regional Transport Committee. And given that in the case of Auckland, the Regional Transport Committee is the Board of Auckland Transport, that creates a little bit of a dilemma in my view, because I'm struggling to see how we have exposure to that beyond the statement of intent and the letter of expectation and other matters that have been outlined in your report. And I think that that's something that's going to have to be clarified as part of this review, because I actually think that Aucklanders have less exposure to the decision-making processes around regional land transport here than in any other part of the country. And that's not a good thing. And as a member of the governing body, I certainly have things that I would like to be able to interrogate from a transport perspective. I have real concerns about the PTOM, the Public Transport Operating Model, and the delivery of bus services under the tender.